Hi, conference report. This video is to conference report pretty much, and the issues that he's bringing up about how you won't really explain the important part of consciousness with the physics of consciousness, and should it even be physics that would explain it? Can it be chemistry, for example? And we got into a back and forth about chemistry is physics, quantum mechanics. Just like planes. This aerodynamics is a physics of behind airliners, but of course airliners have more things involved even in their shape than just the aerodynamics. They have to carry people, for example. So first of all, I'm not saying that it'll be the whole explanation. So let me describe this through analogy. Let's say I believe that I could explain how poetry works, how it has an effect on the human mind, with cognitive science, Lakoff's cognitive science. And I think that's true. I think that's quite possible because I consider that Lakoff's cognitive science and this metaphor approach to cognitive science, Revenge of the Poets. The metaphor, the simile, all of these have been thought of as just flourishes, while poets make the most commanding statements in our language sometimes, and yet it was thought that they did this with just superficialities. They're just ornate curlicues. And cognitive science explains, no, people think in metaphors. So a poem works by when you see the word, it brings in a frame, and through the timing of when you bring those frames in, when you shove frames out by bringing something else in, or two frames that have ironic interactions. And the point is that even if this is true, learning cognitive science won't make you a better poet. And furthermore, even more critical way of putting it is that it might make you a worse poet. So for example, something different but borrowing from the cognitive science domain, as I've learned cognitive science, I don't want to apply it negatively. I don't want to become more manipulative. I already innately understood a lot of this framing, and this cognitive science has put language to it. And I already feel like, I don't want to use words to manipulate people in the way that's possible with framing. And if I do manipulate their emotions, I want it to be in a domain like poetry or fiction, where they know that's what's going on, and they can defer it indirectly, and they can incorporate it into their real life and their real behavior, sort of at their own speed. Okay. It's also like the Feynman example. He had an artist friend that complained he didn't, that he took away the beauty of the flower by analyzing it as a chemical system. Feynman defended himself, saying, no, it just adds to the beauty of the flower. The physical systems of what's going on in a flower is beautiful as well. If you use bioevolution to explain the beauty in terms of, it's just, the bee got matched with it, that's not going to explain how to make a beautiful flower. It doesn't explain why the bee found it beautiful. It doesn't explain why we find something beautiful that it is designed to be beautiful to a bee, or attractive at least. So I understand these layer things, but where I disagree from the position that seems held by a majority, is that when you go to these various levels that are explained in things more fundamental materially, or by any other criteria of fundamental, more logically fundamental, whichever, dependency fundamentals, you don't, it's not a different universe, right? Using Newtonian's laws, I've had people tell me using Newtonian's laws, well, that's how it is at the macroscope, relatively speaking, more or less. But no, because when Newton's laws contradict those lower level laws, Newton's laws are wrong, right? The fact that you can use this level as an approximation, you can look at things a certain way from that level or from that node in a network, a semantic network, that's an that gives you a lot of power, because you can use certain formalisms and symbolic logic, but it doesn't make it really true. It just means you assume it's true. When you're doing that kind of reasoning, you look at it that way. I use an example with Trick of a category error, thinking that things have to be in or out of a category. It's not that simple in the real world. Mothers, that's a category. Is an adoptive mother a mother? Yeah, from most points of view. If you're trying to figure out the genetic diseases that a person might be prone to, no, the mother is this biological mother. Because the perspective puts something on top of that category that you can't invent with mere rules. The perspective, the understanding of the context of why the category is being asserted. Now, in the case of consciousness, I think there is a lot we can learn from consciousness, but can everybody handle it? We're learning more about how consciousness works, make people better or worse at working their own consciousness. Well, I think it's a case-by-case basis. In my case, I'm dedicated to it making me deal with things better. If I see that this knowledge is causing me to have actions that violate some ethic of mine that I believe in, I'll put an end to that. Like with the cognitive science. If I saw myself using knowledge of frames to manipulate people's behavior, I would not continue to pursue that, because I have more than one domain that I look on questions with. I want to triangulate. I want as many domains, and I think that the cognitive scientists can have a comment on poetry, and the poets can have a comment on cognitive scientists and everything else. Right? So there's ways to double check. Some people, well, their cognitive stability is based on their theism, and if they had a material explanation of consciousness, it would screw with that whole framework, and the result might be some sort of distorted, corrupted framework. It might make them worse. But I kind of see that as on them, right? My view as a natural philosopher is that if I see nature working some way, I need to be strong enough to handle it in a way that's acceptable to me. Some truth made me into a hedonistic killer and thief. I would suspect I hadn't seen the full truth. Why? Because, well, that truth would be from one domain, but the truth from another domain where I'm figuring how I should treat other people, if those conflict, to me that shows that I'm missing something. Right? And since I don't have that thing, I have to choose between the two. And I would choose my personal rules for how we should treat each other as a guide. I think that it will help us to know more about this physics. And I don't think that it's, I'm not getting this from you, conference report, but in general I get a lot like, it'll be a bad thing to know. And I get a lot of human exceptionalism, like, well, no, the human consciousness, that's too difficult to explain, obviously too sublime. Or other cop-outs, we won't be able to explain it. It's like, I'm saying let's look at it and see what we can explain. You go, no, nothing. Not you, but I mean these people, nothing. And to me, that's an emotional reaction. I don't see how it can really hurt also in a group like we make up to discuss these issues. We might find out that, if most people had these views with the views they already have, and they add them together and find out how those people are going to be, they're going to be terrible. But that's just an argument that people have used about God. Well, whether it's true or not, people need to believe it, or they won't be good people. Now, similarly with the deterministic angle on consciousness and the willpower, what degrees of freedom might there be, this concept of a necessary predeterminability, because there's a lot of meanings of the word determinism. I'm just tacking this on. This isn't particularly to you, conference report. To me, that also reminds me of theistic reasoning. It's like, why is there a God? Well, because it's the only way we can figure out things started. Right? And then people lost God and they still want, things start from self-proving rules. Gödel proved, no, you can't prove a system from the rules in the system. There's no self-proving system. Sorry. if it's going to be a matter of this predetermination, it has to be from our experiences. You can't ignore all our experiences and say, oh, well, it's the only way everything could have been created that I could think of, so it must, I've eliminated all of the possibilities that I don't know of, so it must be this thing. And it's like, I know that because of logic. Well, how do you know logic? Well, it's self-evident. Well, no, it isn't self-evident. People, not even arithmetic can prove itself with its own principles. And that's what you should expect, because that would be circular reasoning. So what is the source of knowledge? Since it's not logic. Logic processes knowledge. What's the source of knowledge? Okay, everybody knows my answer to what the source of knowledge is, I think. But they probably don't. But I don't really get the idea that digging into things hurts them. Figuring out why a flower grows the way it does doesn't make the flower less beautiful. Understanding the physics of consciousness doesn't hurt our understanding of consciousness as we experience it. And it might be that it doesn't inform it too much either, because there's so many metaphorical systems that the one we're building is high level enough. It's not going to be like every other consciousnness, and that's the one we have to deal with. So how do you program the human mind? But I find there's a lot of resistance to issues like that too. People take their likes and dislikes as their character, their ineffable character that is themselves, and and all we're trying to figure out is how to satisfy those things. I think we're trying to figure out which likes we want to have. People are trying to figure out what they like and what suits them. Anyway, just a few thoughts.